He spent his final nights alone in a dim New York apartment where the lights were always low and the silence felt heavier than the city outside. Philip Seymour Hoffman, at just 46 years old, moved through those last days like a man carrying an invisible weight, one he had never fully spoken about, not even at the height of his fame. The world saw a brilliant actor, a master of emotion, a soul who could disappear into any role. But behind closed doors, there was a softer, quieter struggle, a battle he had kept hidden for years. On his desk lay a few scattered scripts, each marked with notes in his careful handwriting, as if he still hoped to return to them. A half-finished journal entry sat beside a cold cup of coffee, and in the middle of the room he stood still for a long moment, staring at a photo of his children. Three small faces smiling up at him, unaware of the storm tightening around their father. In those last days, he confided a truth to a close friend, a confession so fragile, so personal, it would not be revealed until after he was gone, a truth that explained the silence, the exhaustion, and the haunting look in his eyes during his final weeks. Before we begin this journey through the quiet tragedy of his final days, please consider subscribing so you won't miss the stories that remind us just how fragile and how deeply human our brightest stars truly are. And now, to understand how Philip Seymour Hoffman reached those final moments, we must step back to where everything began. To understand the quiet storm that lived inside Philip Seymour Hoffman, we have to return to the small town of Fairport, New York, where his story first began. Born in 1967, Philip grew up in a modest home with wooden floors that creaked under winter cold and windows that rattled during late-night winds. It was a childhood filled with warmth, but also marked by moments he rarely spoke about. His mother, a schoolteacher, had a gentle voice. One, Philip later said, reminded him of the sound of safety. His father, a businessman, was often away, and the distance between them grew with each passing year. When Philip was 9, their marriage fell apart, and the boy who would later carry entire films on his shoulders suddenly found himself carrying something else, the ache of a home silently splitting in two. He often spent afternoons alone, listening to the muffled hum of the old radio in the living room. Music, voices, stories. They became a kind of refuge. He would mimic what he heard, slipping into characters without even realizing that acting was beginning to grow inside him like a quiet seed. Yet there was another side to his childhood, an early shadow he didn't fully understand at the time. At 12, he discovered alcohol at a friend's gathering. While others laughed and acted wild, Philip felt something different, a calm, a warmth that settled the noise in his chest. He later said it was the first time he felt the world finally stopped spinning. He didn't know then that this moment, this small, innocent escape, would one day become part of the struggle that followed him into adulthood. But for now, he was still just a boy trying to make sense of life, love, and change. And like many children dealing with loneliness, he found solace in the one place where he always felt seen, the school theater stage. From here, the path toward the spotlight began. As Philip stepped onto the stage for the first time in high school, something inside him shifted. The shy, thoughtful boy from Fairport suddenly transformed beneath the warm glow of the theater lights. It was as if all the loneliness, all the confusion, all the unspoken feelings of his childhood found a language they could finally speak. And for the first time, he felt understood, not by people, but by the craft itself. It didn't take long for others to notice. Teachers saw a rare intensity in him, a depth beyond his years. When he moved, the room seemed to quiet. When he spoke, even the restless students in the back row leaned in. Acting wasn't just talent for Philip, it was release, redemption, and revelation all at once. After high school, he went on to NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, where his discipline astonished his professors. While other students partied late into the night, Philip often stayed behind, rehearsing lines until his voice grew hoarse. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing truth, the raw, uncomfortable, emotional truth that most people spend their lives avoiding. And soon Hollywood came calling. Through the 90s and early 2000s, Philip Seymour Hoffman became a force. From Boogie Nights to Magnolia, from the talented Mr. Ripley to Capote, he delivered performances so real, so painfully human, that audiences often forgot they were watching a role at all. In 2006, he won the Academy Award for Capote, but even in victory, he walked with humility, almost as if he believed the spotlight belonged to someone else. Yet behind the applause, something darker lingered. Though the cameras loved him, though critics praised him, and though directors called him one of the finest actors of his generation, the pressure weighed on him in ways no one could see. Each role demanded everything, every corner of his heart, every quiet space in his mind. And when the lights faded, he sometimes found himself alone with the same old ache he'd tried to outrun since childhood. But the real breaking point was yet to come. By the late 2000s, the world saw Philip Seymour Hoffman as an unstoppable artist, confident, fearless, endlessly versatile. But behind the curtain, his inner world had begun to crack again. After more than 2 decades of sobriety, the quiet battle he had once escaped in his youth slowly crept back into his life. It didn't happen suddenly. It began with exhaustion, long nights on set, emotional roles that consumed him, and the growing pressure of being known as the actor who never missed. He pushed himself harder than anyone asked him to, and somewhere in the silence between films, the old temptation returned. He told friends later that the relapse started in a moment of weakness, a moment he thought he could control. But addiction does not negotiate. It waits, patient and silent. And when Philip slipped, it took hold of him again with a ferocity he hadn't expected. For years, he fought quietly. Rehab visits, therapy, months of sobriety, followed by sudden setbacks. His partner, Mimi O'Donnell, stood by him, doing everything she could to keep him grounded. She described watching him struggle as like watching someone you love drown, and no matter how hard you try to pull them up, the current keeps dragging them back. There were days when his hands shook, days when he could barely sleep, days when he'd sit in the kitchen long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring at nothing as if wrestling with a shadow only he could see. But he never stopped working. Acting in many ways became his last lifeline. Yet the roles grew heavier. Characters full of sorrow, regret, and emotional complexity seemed to blur into his own life. He once admitted privately that every time he went deep into a role, it became harder to climb back out. Friends noticed the change. He looked tired, thinner, distracted. The spark in his eyes, once so wild and alive, had dimmed. And then, something shifted in the final months of his life. A quiet retreat, a pulling away from the people who loved him most, as if he sensed the storm tightening and didn't want anyone else to be caught inside it. Little did he know, the final weeks, those last fragile days, were already unfolding. In the final weeks of his life, Philip Seymour Hoffman moved through New York City like a ghost drifting through familiar streets. The January air was cold enough to sting, yet he often walked without gloves, as if he couldn't quite feel the world outside, or perhaps as if the world couldn't touch what was happening inside him. Close friends later said they sensed something different about him. He smiled less. He canceled plans more often. And though he tried to reassure everyone that he was fine, the heaviness in his voice told another story. A few weeks before his death, he met with a longtime friend in a quiet cafe in the West Village. The friend remembered how Philip held his coffee cup with both hands as though grounding himself. They talked about work, about his children, about the future. And then Philip said something he had never said before. He admitted he was tired, tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. "It's like a noise I can't shut off," he whispered. "I keep thinking it'll get quiet again." But it doesn't. His friend asked if he wanted help. Philip nodded, but the look in his eyes revealed a deeper truth. He didn't know where to begin. He spent the next days trying to anchor himself. He attended meetings, visited friends, and spent precious time with his 3 children, who remained the brightest part of his life. In one quiet moment at home, he held his youngest child close and whispered, "I love you more than anything." Those around him later said it sounded like both a promise and a goodbye, but the silence inside him kept growing. On February the 1st, 2014, Philip retreated to his apartment alone, the place where he often read scripts, wrote journal entries, and tried to piece together clarity in moments of chaos. Neighbors said they heard nothing unusual, no noise, no movement. Just silence. The next morning, a friend who hadn't been able to reach him went to check on him. What he found behind that door would break hearts across the world. Philip Seymour Hoffman was gone. Far too soon, far too quietly. In those final hours, no one knows exactly what he thought or what words he might have whispered to himself. But people close to him believe one thing with certainty. His last thoughts were of his children, the three small lights he wished he could have stayed in this world to protect. When the last light in his apartment faded, the world didn't just lose an actor. It lost a father, a friend, a gentle soul fighting a battle no one could see. In the days following Philip Seymour Hoffman's passing, New York felt strangely quieter, like a city holding its breath. Outside the apartment where he spent his final night, fans left flowers, handwritten notes, and simple messages of love. Some quoted his films, others wrote only two words, "Thank you." His memorial service gathered actors, directors, playwrights, and friends who had witnessed his remarkable journey. They spoke not about the tragedy of his final hours, but about the brilliance of his life, his honesty on screen, his humility off it, and his rare ability to make every character feel painfully, beautifully human. Meryl Streep, one of his closest colleagues, said, "He didn't just act, he revealed." Financially, Philip left behind an estate estimated at around $35 million. In his will, he entrusted the bulk of it to his partner, Mimi O'Donnell, and their three children. But his greatest legacy wasn't measured in dollars. It was in the truth he brought to every role, the emotional courage he showed, and the deep humanity he carried into every scene. His partner later created programs supporting addiction recovery, quietly honoring the struggle he fought so bravely. Today, his performances continue to echo. In small theaters, acting classes, and late-night film screenings, young actors study his work the way musicians study legends. They watch his eyes, his silence, the way he breathed life into broken characters, and they learn. Even now, people say you can still feel him in New York, in the theaters he once walked through, in the roles that remain unmatched, in the raw, aching honesty he gave the world. And in the end, we are left with two questions. Questions his life forces us to face. What do we leave behind when the spotlight fades? And who will remember the truth we carried, even when we were silent?